Well, you survived. You can get out of your house and go into the light again. The Colorado legislative session is over. To give us a quick recap of everything that did not happen from the Colorado Springs Gazette, that new mother, a 5-month-old baby. Good to see you again, Megan Schrader.
Thanks.
Thanks for being here. And unfortunately, from the Durango Herald, we thought we'd bring him back again. Peter Marcus, thanks for being here.
Well, if I had to, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, you had to. All right, the beautiful thing about a split legislature is that they don't get anything done. This is a good thing. We saw that for the first couple years of Hick's administration. They had a split legislature. The House had 1 vote majority, and Hick was very popular because they didn't get anything done. Then Democrats had hold of everything, most progressive agenda I've ever seen, and now it's back to that split. You had a saying about death. This was a session for death.
Yeah, there was a lot of bills that had high hopes at the beginning of the session and didn't exactly pan out. Probably the centerpiece of that would be the construction defect reform legislation.
What was the issue behind that? That condominiums are so expensive in this market compared to others. Starting families really can't get into condos.
Yes, that they're expensive, but also that the argument is that there's a lack of development because there's this fear that the developers will be sued for simple defects. Of course, there have been examples of developers just doing a horrible job and folks having a nightmare situation. So it goes both ways. But what they thought was that if they could at least limit the lawsuits, then there would be a good chance that developers would feel more inspired to build. That had bipartisan support but didn't have Democratic leadership support. And so the bill really just didn't go anywhere towards the end of the session. And then the speaker, though, says that discussions will continue next year, but obviously we hear that about
discussions.
Yes.
It is an interesting dynamic that there's often a lot of bipartisan support for something that will easily pass floor votes on both sides if only it gets to the floor. But the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House can always send it to kill committees, including this one.
Yeah. It worked in the reverse for Democrats. They probably had the votes on the Senate floor to get funding for long-acting reversible contraceptions, the LARC program. But
the LARC program? They called it the LARC program?
They did call it the LARC program.
They wanted to name a birth control bill over LARC? Let's just do this for a LARC. It's a good. And why didn't this get the votes?
It went to a kill committee. Senate President Cadman didn't support the bill, and he sent it to a kill committee. Because
this would have given public funds for abortive, as it's argued, birth control, including IUDs.
Right.
Which, by the way, is serious. I knew a guy who came back from Iraq, lost his leg to an IUD.
I think you're getting the terminology mixed up.
I think you're a little off there.
I know what I'm talking about. But that was another big emotional fight that probably had the votes on both, but couldn't do it.
Yep.
Leadership killed it. Death with dignity, since we're talking about death. Now, this one I thought was going to be a spectacular discussion for Colorado to have. What was the bill and what happened to it?
Well, it's funny because I was just talking about how I'm decompressing from the session right now, so I'm trying to forget about everything. Right. But this one was kind of easily forgettable because it happened at the very beginning of the session. It was a bill that would have allowed doctors to provide terminally ill patients with certain life-ending medication. And again, there was bipartisan support, but it was... This wasn't a political issue. This was truly an emotional issue, and about where you stood on assisted suicide and what they're calling death with dignity. And this was
modeled after, was it the Oregon law that says under these circumstances, and if a patient is terminal, a doctor can help with ending that person's life without fear of being a criminal.
Exactly.
Is that basically what it was?
That's pretty much it in a nutshell. And, there was very emotional testimony. You had folks who were facing the end of their life saying that this is a decision I want. And then on the other side, you had the religious element and some legal concerns with...
What was a legal concern?
There were concerns about putting doctors potentially at risk for doing this because, without federal backing and all that kind of stuff. But really, it was the emotional end of things that drove it. And I just think lawmakers felt that it was just not the right time to take that step.
I love leadership. it's just not the right time to talk. I know you guys are dying. This is important. But let's not have a vote on this.
It was another one where they said we'll talk about it again.
We'll talk about it. Now you had the headline of all headlines, which wasn't printed. What was it? Go ahead.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Let's hear it.
Oh, you're going to get me in trouble.
Yeah, what do I care?
Death with dignity dies dignified death.
That was going to be your editor wouldn't let you do it.
Yeah, I don't think they would have gone for that one.
Yeah,
See, you're getting me in trouble now.
like I care. What about the fetal homicide bill? Was one of those that popped up very late, and I thought after the horrific murder, I'll use the term murder, of the pregnant woman up north, that this thing would have been a slam dunk. What happened to it? Talking about another death bill.
Well, it also was supported by Senate Republicans and went through and was assigned to a kill committee in the House by House Democrats, who were concerned that it could, as it has in other states, lead to the prosecution or even the specter of prosecution for women who had miscarriages or who made medical decisions.
That was a real stretch, I thought. I mean, I read the language of it. That was a real stretch. And to call what happened up there anything but a murder, that one just didn't pass the smell test to me. I know you can't say it because you're a reporter. I'll say it.
There was specific language in the bill that exempted women for their medical decisions. But there was similar language in other states, like in Utah, a woman who had declined to get a cesarean section, and she was charged. The charges were dropped, but to lose a child and then to be brought up on charges, that's rough.
This issue is not going away either. This is politically, this is kind of a nightmare for both the pro-choice world and Democrats.
How so?
2013, they passed, legislation that they thought was going to, get us towards justice, which it did. I mean, there are long sentences that are attached to the current law, but what there's not is that symbolic murder charge, which when you're dealing with, I mean, who could, in their wildest dreams could have expected that a woman would have her fetus cut out of her body by another woman? I mean, the imagery with that, it's astonishing. And so now, Democrats are defensive about whether they went far enough in 2013. The pro-choice world is very defensive now because anytime you start getting person written into the language of a bill, which this has to in order to have that murder charge, you're starting to talk about personhood potentially. They talk about this slippery slope that's going to erode Roe v. Wade and everything else.
I just don't see the slippery slope in that this is a child who is wanted and is killed. I mean, it seems so very different than the personhood amendment that's put on the ballot every other year and dies a terrible death.
But the personhood amendment last November was run by personhood under the guise of a fetal homicide bill. That made Democrats nervous. If they did it once under this guise, what happens when this law takes effect? Because you would call the fetal homicide amendment, and it was picked up, Personhood USA. Yeah. So it was.
Is there talk about this going to a ballot question if the same personhood folks want to put something else on the ballot?
There's talk about that, and honestly, beyond that, this is going to have implications in the U.S. Senate race in 2016. I had a story this week that Ellen Roberts, State Senator Ellen Roberts, is officially seriously considering a run. She has a lot of people talking to her. She is kind of viewed as a dangerous candidate to potentially. She would first have to survive a very tough primary, but if she did, she'd be
against, at this point, nobody.
Well, if it exists.
Yeah, right.
But then she would be facing Michael Bennet, and she's a woman, and there's the whole war on women messaging, and she supported fetal homicide, which opponents call fetal personhood for obvious reasons. And, so this is going to come up politically.
Ellen Roberts is a pro-choice Republican,
which is what makes it so fascinating.
I mean, talk about somebody who would be dangerous to Bennett would be a pro-choice, intelligent, articulate woman.
Exactly.
That would be a nightmare for him.
And that's why it's so fascinating because she's now saying, I'm a woman and I'm pro-choice. You can't tell me Planned Parenthood what I am and what I'm not. So it's going to be
right.
And it all stems.
Also, I think this one's a tougher one to sell. That if you're part of the pro-choice movement and say, hey, this, you try to stop fetal homicide, well, then you're anti-choice. I think a lot of people in the middle understand the difference and understand where a line is drawn. Yeah, maybe, maybe not. All right, let's talk about the dynamics, because this is always the fun part, is that now the governor has a split legislature. He's happy, all right? Our governor is happy again. He won a tough re-election, but he won pretty handily. And now he's got the split legislature, so he has nothing really awful on his desk. He's got a couple things, including photo red light, and everybody in Colorado hates photo red light cameras,
including the governor.
Including the governor,
who said he got one himself.
Yeah. Big deal. Yeah, I'm sure the $25 was a big deal for him, but he's going to veto it, isn't he?
Yeah, he said as much. He got 2 bills on his desk actually, and neither met the guidelines he set out for a red light camera bill he would support. So he's going to veto it.
So in other words, when next ticket you get on photo radar, thank the governor, because it looks like he's going to veto that one. And when was to put it up for a popular vote?
Yeah, municipalities would have had to get approval from the electorate before they
that's brilliant.
Put the cameras
and they
in.
never would, because we all hate them.
Which is why those municipalities also were saying we can't have that happen. And, you know, the governor's always stood pretty strong with local counties and municipalities on what they say, and that's kind of what he highlighted in his letter.
Yeah. Doesn't matter what the people say in those municipalities, but as long as the city council and mayors, because he's a mayor, down in heart, he's the mayor of Colorado still. So let's talk about what else is on his desk. There was a bill that takes tax increment financing, and it changes it a little bit. This is the corporate welfare that cities give to build things like the Gaylord Hotel and big, huge welfare projects. Last year, a bill from Dickie Lee Hollinghorst made it all the way to the governor. He vetoed it, and she did it again this year, and it got through both houses. What's he going to do this time?
He was still saying that he was mulling that over, as usual. He's actually got a few veto situations to deal with along the tax/consumer spending aspects of things. There's actually another bill that there's a large outcry for him to veto that would raise the amount of small loans, like from $1,000 to $3,000, $3,000 to $5,000, and then there's a subsequent...
Loans from whom?
Small lenders who do small loans, but they're not payday loans because they're supervised smaller loans, and there's interest rates tied to that, and he's being asked to veto that also. So he's
half
got
a minute left. Tell me, what do you think is the biggest decision he's got to take care of in the next weeks?
The Colorado Municipal League is really pushing him to veto that tax increment financing bill. That'll be an interesting decision for sure.
And school districts want him to sign it because they lose money on those corporate welfare projects.
They do. They lose if they have a mill levy override, they're losing potentially millions of dollars.
Megan, thank you. Peter, thank you. Thank you. Listen for me on KHOW Radio. Tell a friend about the Independence Institute, and we'll see you next week.